They have the KDHA that does inspections of all the schools. And yeah, there's nothing like that in Hong Kong, that's for sure.
Justin Hardman is the founder and CEO of 21st Century Learning, training teachers and leaders across Hong Kong.
It's like one of the most hated days of my year.
Yeah.
They learned it last week and they're teaching it this week. Well, what happens next week? We don't know.
I don't think there's been a technology advance in the history of technology in schools that has so essentially threatened the role of a teacher. Right?
I was shocked at what I saw, and I knew that I didn't want my children to go to those sorts of schools.
It's not like buying a MacBook versus a PC, like there's a huge amount of nuance and a lot of stuff that's out of your control, frankly.
I feel so bad for those children who scored 40 or 36.
Everyone's idea of school is so deeply embedded in their brain. That's why schools are so hard to change.
What do you think the parents should be looking for in a school? What does it actually take to prepare students for a world that's changing faster than our curriculum? To help us unpack that today, my guest, Justin, is joining us. We're here in Hong Kong. And Justin's a dual Australian and New Zealand citizen who's called Hong Kong his home for decades. We'll find out exactly how many, I'm sure. After serving as the Director of Technology at Hong Kong International School, he realised that transforming education required a much bigger ecosystem. And in 2012, in the same year that I founded my company, he founded 21st Century Learning and has dedicated his career to making sure schools don't just survive the future, but actively shape it. Please welcome CEO and founder of 21st Century Learning, Justin Hardman.
It's great to be here with you, and thank you for all the partnerships over the years and the collaborations, and looking forward to the conversation today.
Yeah, we've known each other for quite some years now.
Quite some years. When you said decades, it made me feel very old, but that's okay.
Well, how many decades have you been in Hong Kong?
Since pre-handover, so 1992 is when I first moved here. So I always tell people, I'm from New Zealand, but I've lived in Hong Kong longer than anywhere else. So kids were born here, so it's home. Yeah.
Yeah, same for me. I came in 95. And where in New Zealand are you from?
A little town called Rotorua.
Yes, I've been there.
Okay.
It's smelly.
Yes, the smelly one. That's what I always tell people if they visited New Zealand. Yeah.
And you can. Yeah, it's nice, but it's a tourist destination for the.
It is. Yeah.
The sulfur springs.
The geysers and
Okay. So we founded the company in the same year. That's probably, and then we got in touch. So I think you have an interesting perspective. Obviously, as an educator, as founder of 21st Century Learning, we can talk a bit about what you do in that role, and as a parent. And so we'll get to all of that. But I always like to take you back. We'll go all the way back to when you were at school. What we all have in common is that we had some sort of an education. So could you tell us about yours?
Yeah, I guess there's really two phases. I mean, as I said, I was born in New Zealand, so grew up, went to the regular school, state school in New Zealand, local school, biked to school, had the kind of, rode my bike to school, suburban, kind of setting, all that kind of stuff. And then when I was a kid, moved to Hong Kong. So that was kind of the second phase of my K-12 schooling experience. And that was very different, right?
Because so you're a lot younger.
Moving to
I'm just doing the math.
Moving to Hong Kong, moved to a big international school, American curriculum, so different than where I was from. So I guess one of the things that you can say for me is that I wear a lot of hats when it comes to education. My parents were both educators. That's what brought us to Hong Kong, and so went to international school. Parents worked in one, kids go to one now. So it's I guess my journey is a product of the system and now working on the system in a way.
Is it the same one? Did your parents work at HKS?
Yes, yeah. So wear a lot of hats at that organisation.
Yeah, you're very tied to that organisation. We might come on to that later on. How did you find the transition though, coming from like some might say like an idyllic setting in a regular school in New Zealand? Obviously, at that time, 92, HKIS was already well established, large school, not quite as large as it is now, but you must have found it very different.
I think, it was exciting. I think, right, and for me, I wasn't, necessarily, as a New Zealand kid, I wasn't like the one into rugby and all that kind of stuff. So for me, it was like it's a great new opportunity. So for me, it was very exciting. There was obviously the cultural challenges when you've grown up in a kind of monoculture to going to a more diverse and different, environment. I suspect that would be a little different now, actually, right, with kids, because there's a bit more of a global monoculture. I always remember this story of first day of class in 7th grade, asking another kid in the class, "Can I borrow a rubber?" rubber, and because in New Zealand the rubber is an eraser, right?
Just to clarify, same in the UK.
Yeah, and being so embarrassed, but those kind of things are a pretty minor thing compared to all of the opportunities that school and that environment provided.
Yeah, no, it is an amazing opportunity. I think we still mustn't lose sight of that fact today, that our kids that get to go to these types of schools are still very, very privileged. And then what happened after school?
Went to university in Australia. Spent a while doing lots of different things, pursued a lot of different degrees, but ended up with an economics degree. I had this idea, and this is maybe partly from the American high school experience, that, go to university and explore what you're interested in intellectually. And I've always been into politics and economics, and so that's what I did. But in terms of what I'm good at and, where I had skills and a lot of interest, it was technology. And so I ended up actually coming back to Hong Kong post-university to work as a developer, essentially. So I'd always been doing that kind of on the side all through university. Building was kind of like the era of like building websites, right? And you could help people out and building little apps and things like that. So I was always doing that. And so I ended up doing that for my former school and building educational platforms and systems and getting into education kind of more from the technology side of things, hard technology, but then getting more of a bug for the education side. And the great thing about technology in schools is that it does afford you this kind of view across the organization, because, even more so now, but back then as well, it impacted every part of the organization.
So were you a director of technology? Were you managing the technology for the school, or were you teaching?
I did a bit of all of it, yeah. So I started out more on the kind of technology side, IT department, then became technology coach, programming teacher a little bit, and then at the end I was the director of technology, which oversees both the kind of pedagogical instructional side of technology as well as the hard, boxes and wires and servers and all that kind of stuff.
When you look back, 92, it's like, it's come so far so quickly, hasn't it? And in the work that you do now, and certainly in the work that I do, technology and those dreaded two letters, AI, are coming up in conversations almost every single day. Maybe we can just go straight there. You've got children in school. Are they in primary, middle?
Primary and middle, yeah.
Right.
My oldest is in grade 6.
Yeah. What's with the state of technology in schools today, the way that children are interacting with technology in classrooms? What are your views on that?
I think it's evolving, and definitely when I was first working in education, it was kind of the bullish time for technology, and schools were rolling out one-to-one programs and doing all kinds of, technology's the future, creativity, all of these, if you want to prepare kids for unknown future, we have to use the tools of today, that type of talk. I think that's definitely pulled back a little bit because of, the obvious impact of smartphones and, social media, things that actually maybe not part of educational settings, but are nevertheless part of our, milieu that we're living in. So I think that at the moment, there's definitely a little bit of a pushback against technology in schools. But at the same time, the technology in schools, conversation is dominated by AI, rightly so. And that's also something we can't ignore. Schools have to contend with it. You can't just be like, well, we're not an AI school, because, you can't control what kids are doing at home, what they're doing on their smartphones. And so I think it's one of those things where schools have to walk this, delicate path, right, of, embracing things that can be helpful, but also creating structures and frameworks to allow students to use these things responsibly, and teachers for that matter.
But I can't think of another area of teaching and learning where the teachers are learning at the same rate as they need to be teaching it. It feels, certainly with my parent hat on for a moment, it feels quite risky. Do you not think so?
You mean using AI?
No, it feels risky, the whole environment. Like your child is in a classroom with a teacher of technology. The teacher doesn't know what they're doing, and it's not their fault because things are changing so quickly. But, they learned it last week and they're teaching it this week. Well, what happens next week? We don't know.
Yeah. To a certain extent, this has always been the case with technology in education. And even when we were rolling out one-to-one programs, people would obviously ask the question, well, where's the research on this? Well, there isn't any research, because educational research means you need to do double-blind studies, and they take, 5 years, and by the time you finish the research, the technology's all changed. And so what use is it really, right? This is a real problem, I guess, when you look at the efficacy, measuring the efficacy of technology in classrooms. Never mind the fact that a lot of the research in technology is from, maybe inappropriate contexts, like, coming from US public schools. How applicable is that into, international schools in Hong Kong? With AI, I mean, the problem is compounded in the sense that AI changes so quickly. It's like, you can train people up on using one platform, and then, 3 months later, it's completely changed. And I think that in a sense, we have no choice but to have schools be lab sites where we're learning about this and doing it in a way that is responsible, but that we're actually learning and developing and growing as an organization, both the teachers and the principals and everyone involved in the school, but the students as well.
Yeah, no, it's interesting that you mentioned that classroom as a lab. And I know that in the work that you do a lot of work with teachers. I think most of your role is more teacher facing or senior in school facing, right?
100% of what 21st Century Learning does is school facing, so professional learning for teachers, but also increasingly for leaders as well. All aspects of K-12 education. So
what are you hearing? Like, what's the sentiment among educators in terms of what we just discussed, technology in the classroom as a lab? Do they feel that it's slightly vulnerable, perhaps?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. I mean, I don't think there's been a technology advance in the history of technology in schools that has so essentially threatened the role of a teacher, right? I mean, if you look at a lot of the talk from the evangelists that are, building these tools, they talk about essentially replacing educators or heavily changing what the role of educators is. So I think there's definitely a lot of anxiety, for sure. But the only way we can, I would say, meet that anxiety is through learning and figuring these things out. And, as with anything, I think there's a continuum of different responses within organizations, all everywhere from, teachers wanting to and leaders wanting to embrace it and just run 100%, let's figure it out, to people who would be like, hang on, we need to just take a pause and not use this at all. As with everything, I think there's probably somewhere in between that is where we should be.
Yeah, we had a panel of heads a couple of months ago, and I think the general sentiment was proceeding with caution, which is obviously a very diplomatic response. Let's talk about how do we then focus more on the human side of teaching and learning, because that can't be replaced by AI.
Yeah. I mean, I think theoretically what AI and what technology in general should allow schools to do is outsource some of the kind of more skill-based learning to technology, and then that allows more time in school to focus on the soft skills, right? Like how do we work together, how do we interact as human beings? And I think that if schools are making that transition, then I think they're going in the right direction. I mean, certainly technology doesn't replace the immense importance of schools as places that are bringing people together. I mean, I'm a firm believer that learning happens in communities and learning happens socially, right? And the important learning you get from school isn't the skills per se or the content per se. It's the actual, how do you work together? How do you, develop confidence? How do you work in a team? How do you learn to present and communicate your ideas? And you can't do that through screens. You do that through, the physical environment.
But some would argue that you can. I mean, certainly since COVID, we've seen a lot of, I guess in some countries they call it school refusal, but in my circles, I see children who just prefer to be online, to learn online. I mean, I'm not completely on board with that. I mean, it certainly wouldn't have been right for my children, but are you seeing that trend?
I mean, I think that you hear about, like, in certain contexts, people wanting to do the homeschooling thing and all of these, and there's certainly a lot more models out there around online schools that might suit particular students, that are, maybe elite athletes that need to, do a different kind of school. But I think by and large, most kids are going to keep going to fairly traditional bricks-and-mortar schools, get on a bus, come home at a certain time, because that fits most, parents and families' modality, right? And most other systems that are maybe more online require a lot more of the parent, frankly, right, to guide that, if you're doing fully online learning. But I think, I think this is one of the things that I think is a little bit regrettable coming out of the pandemic, because a lot of people in my circles were excited in a way during the pandemic. They're like, well, this is a real opportunity to revolutionize education education. Schools are never going to be the same. And actually, they ended up basically reverting back to, it was like a rubber band, right? Back to what they were all before, and everyone sort of breathed a sigh of relief. But I think one of the things that happened during the pandemic was we discovered actually there's some kids that really learn better. They thrive in this environment versus the face-to-face environment, and they're learning more. Not all, some learn worse, but some learn better. And for those kind of kids, I feel like, did we not learn some things that we could maybe apply to the way schools work now? I think it would be great if you had schools that, for instance, had, a requirement that everyone do one online course, right? Or it's something like that. I don't know. There's certainly has been a lot of changes to the way we do school out of the pandemic. It did take a lot of learnings, I don't think, from that experience.
You don't think so?
No, I don't think so, no.
Yeah. It was funny. It was at the time, I remember it was a lot of semantics that I used to say the schools had closed, and I got scolded for that. We haven't closed. We're doing online learning. I was like, come on.
Yeah. Well, there's some obvious reasons why schools did that, right? You need to protect their business. People, they want to do refunds and all that if you're a private school. But I also think I think the school does provide that kind of community aspect. And schools that, did online well during the pandemic were the ones that leaned into that aspect of it. How can we still provide this essential function of community and social belonging for kids, not just like keep them busy in front of the screen all day learning the content?
Yeah, interesting. It's interesting what you say, though, about I don't doubt that some children will prefer to be online. And I've seen there's a couple of businesses in particular that are doing extremely well, online school. But I don't think those decisions to take their schooling online are always done with the right information or with the right intentions. I think, what we have to remember, again, we said earlier that our children, we're sitting in Hong Kong, we work with private education, private educators. Do you have teachers and leaders in your community from public, like local schools, or not?
We do.
You do?
We do. Most of our events have a fee attached, but we do also free events as well for educators, and we do get attendees from government schools coming along to those. And as you know, Ruth, in Hong Kong, there is this real bifurcation between the government system and the international school system that is not really language based or even resource based in some cases, right? And government schools can be very well resourced, right? Especially now with all this AI funding and so on. It's more just a question of culture and the way the schools work. And the thing we hear most from government teachers is, this is all sounds great what you're talking about, but we couldn't do that in my school, right?
Why? Because they wouldn't have the freedom, the authority, or the large class sizes, or
a combination of all of the above. Yeah. A lot of it is culture, I think, right? In terms of the leadership culture.
Yeah.
One of the things in international schools is that teachers do tend to have a lot of agency to try new things and to pilot things and less, I wouldn't say less fear of failure, but have the ability to try something and maybe potentially fail. This is, if you look at leadership theory, right, that's all about creating environments where people feel comfortable to take risks and so on. I think international schools, broadly speaking, are pretty good incubators for that.
Agree, because they're modeling. If we're saying to parents that we will cultivate these skills in your children, then they have to model that too. But we are talking about private schools, international schools. They're fee paying. They are expensive. They are for around about 6% of Hong Kong children, and the same in the UK. I don't know what it is in Australia.
Australia would be pretty high because they have a whole huge private school system. In New Zealand, I think it's pretty small. The kids that go to private schools.
Yeah. So it's about 94% of children who go to state-funded free schools, and about 6 that don't. And so we have to remember that. I have to because they're lucky children.
They sure are. Yeah.
They won't know it for a few more decades, but let's your role as a parent. You've got a child in elementary and one in middle school, and also you're not an American family. I know that you obviously chose HKIS because your parents worked there, so therefore you went there. Why did you choose it for your children?
There's a community aspect to it. I know a lot of people that send their kids there and have a lot of connections to the school. My wife is Canadian, so you have a North American connection, I guess.
Yeah.
There's not a New Zealand international school in Hong Kong.
Not yet.
Maybe I have to start one. But it ticked a lot of boxes for us, I guess. Yeah.
The Australian school welcomes Kiwis too.
That's true. Yeah, that's true. But they have the different schedule. I don't know that.
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah, completely upside down. So most of my work is with parents. How do you think that parents' expectations of a good school are shifting? I think parents are also completely confused about what they should be looking for in a school. As I say, they're grasping at this AI theme because everyone's talking about it, so they think that they should be talking about it too. And, I hope that day by day with the parents that I meet, that we're guiding them to choose the best fit schools. I mean, what do you think the parents should be looking for in a school?
I mean, I think it's a really tough one. I mean, you know this whole world better than I do, right? But as a parent, when I became a parent and I was faced with this, okay, I've got to choose a school, I was really suddenly struck by the fact that, like, do I actually really know any of these schools and, like, what's going on there, right? And even as a parent, like, knowing what's actually happening in the school is sometimes a challenge, right? So as a kind of buyer, right, if you want to use that term, so I think it's very challenging to figure out what is the right product for, you have these names, brand names like IB or whatever, but in a way that less important than some of the other factors I think that are actually true for school. Like, what is the culture of the school? Who are the other families that are going there, right? I mean, these are things that you can kind of figure out and around the edges and so on. But I think, at the end of the day, most parents want a school that is a safe environment where kids are well taken care of, where they can, find their own, pathway and are supported in that. I think some parents are much more focused on the academic side, and there are schools that lean more into that and want to push on that. So I think it's, you just have to have a lot of conversations, I guess. And, I feel I have a lot of industry knowledge. So
I was going to say, same for me. When I started the business because there was no one to guide me to choose schools. And I worked in government local schools, not worked in them, but with them. And I was shocked at what I saw. And I knew that I didn't want my children to go to those sorts of schools, but I also did not want my children to go to a pure English speaking international school. And then I changed their school, would it have been just before the pandemic, like 2017 or 2018. And I just knew too much. I was like, oh my goodness. No, I was eliminating schools quicker than I could even think that, I'll consider that one because I just knew too much. Yeah. You must be in the same situation, things from the other side.
Yeah, the thing is, schools are human enterprises, right? So, your mileage may vary in the sense that, okay, I love the school, I love the brand, the facilities and all that kind of stuff. But when you send your grade 3 student to the school, they're going to go to this teacher. And that teacher can be very different than another teacher in the same grade, right? It's not like buying a MacBook versus a PC, there's a huge amount of nuance and a lot of stuff that's out of your control, frankly.
That is true, but I suppose what I would say is that the culture and the leadership sets the tone. Like, they've hired that person.
For sure, yeah.
So what were their criteria for hiring that person in the beginning? How is that person then let me ask you, I don't know too much about this. How are teachers monitored and monitored in a school? Like, this is a question that I get asked a lot. Like, how do we ascertain the quality of teachers? And I take your point that I always say to parents, you might get a dud teacher one year. We have to roll with it. That's out of our control. But as an institution, you would hope that the majority of the teachers are like quality. But what does quality mean, and how do we ascertain?
I mean, I wouldn't want to speak for any one school.
No, in general.
Every school has different appraisal processes, right? Typically growth oriented, right? For instance, the grade 3 team is working on this year. They're working on it together. Such and such a teacher in that grade is focusing on this. And, that would be the typical kind of performance system in a school where it's like oriented around growth.
But that's the growth of the teacher as an individual. Yeah.
When it comes to evaluating, the quality of the teacher in terms of student results, that's a whole other piece, right? That's a complicated area. Some schools will use standardized testing results, and then you can look at, the results that they got as the students came in versus how they came out. But I don't know how many schools do that, and there's a lot of debate around the efficacy of that approach as well, right? Particularly in a situation in Hong Kong where, particularly international schools, kids are, the school is just one part of their educational ecosystem, let's say, right? They've got,
Interesting.
The parent really is the locus of the education for most international school kids. The school's where they go during the day, but there's all kinds of other stuff happening after school on the weekends. They're coming from affluent families where there's a strong focus on learning. So the teacher is important for sure in terms of the academic outcomes, but they're probably in some ways less of a locus for focusing on the improvement of kids compared to maybe in a context where maybe it's a kid going to a public school where the school is 100% of the kids learning or much higher percentage of the kids learning. This is just my personal opinion on it. I don't know. I don't think there's many international schools that are using, or maybe any, using student feedback or student results as a way to evaluate individual teachers. They would certainly be looking at a kind of a grade level, cohort level, or a year level, cohort level, but in terms of, and they would use it to modify instruction for individual kids, but in terms of evaluating teacher efficacy, I'm not sure.
So what are they using to evaluate teacher efficacy?
Well, they're using observations. Yeah. They're using, some schools do parent feedback. I mean, I think a good school would be using a whole, range of different qualitative and quantitative tools to evaluate teacher efficacy.
Interesting what you say. I don't disagree about the fact that, school is just school. And I do say that to parents sometimes. But you would hope, especially for the fees that we're paying, for these really expensive schools. So one area, I don't know, we're probably straying slightly outside of what you do, but I'm interested to hear your views. We've just had IB results. I think it was on the 6th of July. It's like one of the most hated days of my year.
Yeah.
My WhatsApp blows up, or the Facebook and everything. And maybe with your tech background as well. I mean, scores are not the whole story. And there are stories behind the scores. We know that. And we know that, even children who, they come from affluent families or ambitious families, I prefer to say. Because a lot of these families sacrifice a lot to be able to send their children to these schools. And yet, is the school able to take credit for these high scores? In my opinion, not entirely. And there's that exists on a continuum from maybe quite a lot. Yeah. Let's take quite a lot of credit because we added a lot of value, or not much at all, where we see very toxic tuition cultures in some of these schools. Yeah. Do your children do a lot of stuff outside of school, extra?
I mean, for my family, most of the outside of school stuff is like sports or like developing other, capabilities like coding or, art or those kind of things. Like we don't have them, there is a couple of, improving your math or your literacy, but it's mostly on the non, 3 hours areas.
So tuition, I mean, what do it must be a pain point for teachers when they're doing their best, they're following their curriculum, the syllabus, and they're delivering a lesson. Let's take maths, because that's a really quite a straightforward process, right, to get through the curriculum, to teach all the different topics. And then these children are outside having umpteen hours of tuition. Is that a pain point for teachers?
I think people have different views on it. I think most schools care deeply about the wellness of kids. And so if kids coming into school tired, or kids coming into school confused because the outside tutors are using different systems or pushing kids or, beyond where they can go, that kind of thing, I think that can be a pain point for schools. But I mean, I think, again, it's like anything, right? There's a kind of continuum of, isn't it? I mean, in a way, the best form of learning is one-on-one tutoring, right? In a sense, right? Because you're getting direct feedback. So it would be silly to say, well, don't do any, it's terrible to do any of this stuff and you should only do school between these hours. I mean, I don't think most schools would say that. But I think that there can be natural, challenges sometimes when it comes to tutoring. It's all like anything. You've got to, it's the devil's in the details, I would say.
Yeah, of course. And in most schools, I think their party line is generally, we don't believe that you need to go outside for additional tutoring, because obviously they have to say that, right? Otherwise there's kind of...
Well, I mean, they don't want to contribute to like the rat race, right? Of like, and they don't want to say, your child will do better if they had tutoring, even though, I mean, I think obviously they probably will, right? Yeah, it's like, but I think the line from the schools makes a lot of sense. And what else can they say? Really?
Exactly. I'd love to ask, I can't remember how many, and I hate the idea of parading out those students that got 45 points, and all the schools do it every year, and I feel so bad for those children who scored 40 or 36, but it was so much better than they were predicted to do like 2 years prior. But I would hazard a guess that almost all of those 44, 45 students have done a lot of work outside of school on their own, one-to-one.
Maybe. I don't know. It's hard to know. Probably. Yeah. It's, as for whether schools can claim credit for them, I mean, I think they can claim credit in lots of ways. I mean, I'm sure the program that they're running is excellent. Schools are also selective, right, for the kids kids that they're bringing in.
Yeah.
Some schools more than others, right? So I don't know. I think it's like anything. And people want to send their kids to schools, not necessarily even because the school, as I said, is a community, right? So, if maybe my kid is not going to get a 45 on the IB, right? And no school could get them there.
Yeah.
But it's nice to be around kids that are getting 45, you know what I mean? Like you're part of that strong academic ethos, right? And that can help any
Yeah.
kid go from point A to point B. So I think it's, it's a complicated,
It is.
mix of things.
It definitely is. So tell us a bit more about 21st century learning. I mean, as I understand it, you run a lot of events, some excellent events that we've been at, and professional development, right?
Yeah, I mean, so the origins of it really were planted when I was working in a school, HKIS. Started at this conference, right? And it was really kind of it was a thing we started because with some colleagues from other schools, because there was no platform for the tech people in the schools to get together and share best practices. And so, if no one's doing it, why don't we do it ourselves? And that grew quite quickly to be over 500 attendees in the early years. This is pre-2012. And so then when I left the school, I thought, well, let's continue to do this. And it's just sort of gradually expanded into a lot of different domains. So we still do that original event, which is, a conference. So that's people coming along and sharing sessions. It's not, ongoing professional learning. It's really a, flash in the pan, inspirational type of thing. Get some ideas, bring it back to your school, build some community, build some connections. That's really, 80% of what we do. We just do it across a lot of different domains now, including physical education, health and wellness, outdoor education, leadership, all of these different areas and across the region in mainland China. But we are, moving more in towards trying to build, course type platforms. So professional learning courses for particular areas and online courses as well.
So are teachers like part of what we were talking about earlier, the quality monitoring? Are teachers required to earn CPD points?
Every school's different on that front, yeah.
It's not a requirement, but...
Well, I mean, it depends on the school.
Individual school policy,
yeah. So some schools will have a certain number of hours per year. Depending on which country you come from, you might have licensure requirements to get, PD training. A lot of schools are they're very strategic, right, in terms of what they're focusing on. So there's a lot of PD that's like being delivered by the school by bringing in consultants, providing courses that they've come up with, particularly for larger groups, that have this kind of economy of scale. So there's a whole kind of continuum. But some schools have like maybe you have to do so many hours. All the way to schools that are doing everything themselves.
It's another indication of how the private international schools in Hong Kong are quite autonomous. Right? It's hard for parents to understand. It's hard for anyone to understand them. There's no standardization or consistency. We don't have any ratings or rankings like we do in some other countries. There's no external inspections that I wish there were. Wouldn't that be a good idea?
Well, I mean, almost every international school in Hong Kong would have accreditation.
But different,
right?
Like CIS or...
Yeah, like they would have CIS or they would have WASC or they would have one other. I mean, they definitely all have some sort of accreditation. They're not always the same accreditation, that's for sure.
I suppose. And all those reports, actually, I don't tend to look. I looked at those. They're very, very spaced. They're quite far apart, like 4 or 5 years sometimes.
It depends on the program, but a few years, and then you usually have an interim check-in. But there's no like scheme like in Dubai, they have the KDHA that does inspections of all the schools. And there's nothing like that in Hong Kong, that's for sure.
I need to look more into that. Then those CIS and WASC reports are all available, right?
Typically not. I mean, schools don't.
See, that's the problem.
Don't publish them. I mean, they're designed for the school to reflect on its own. I mean, most of those accreditations processes are heavily reflective.
Right.
So there's a lot of work that the school has to do. Like every school dreads its accreditation year, right? Because somebody's got to do a ton of work collecting all this data, putting it in a big report, and then the team comes in. They read the report in advance, and then do a lot of interviews and questions. And it's very much more. It's more of an internal exercise to get the badge to put on the website. It's not a thing where, like with an Ofsted or the KDHA in Dubai, where there's like a PDF that anyone can download.
I so wish there were. I mean, that's fine. That's great for the school. Good that they do that, but it's not much help for parents who are looking from the outside in to try to understand what is this school all about. But
I mean, like I said, schools are very human enterprises, right? And personally, I don't even know, like if there was such a scheme where you could read the reports reports, how helpful would it really be in terms of evaluating?
It's helpful when we have that in the UK. So for the UK boarding schools, we have 2 different bodies. And it's helpful to the point where at least some of the schools, they fail on certain aspects. So that's a real red flag. You know, and I know that there are schools in Hong Kong that would fail on certain aspects. But no, it would be super helpful. I'd love it.
I mean, that's true. I mean, that would be a true external, because even the accreditations, I mean, they are to a certain extent, they're independent, but they're,
it's
they're
also a voluntary scheme, right? They sign up
Yeah.
for it. Like you say, it's kind of like another badge.
Yeah.
Another badge. So what are you working on for the next few years? Like, what's your big, audacious goal as CEO and founder of 21st Century Learning? Is it more of the same, or have we got something interesting on the horizon?
Well, I mean, we just want to continue to support, educators and in a more continuous way. So, like, as I said, we're doing a lot of conferences, which are, powerful communities, but we want to provide making a more ongoing support to schools, both in terms of communities of practice. So I just had a call this morning about a new leadership program that we're going to be releasing, which will be a combination of online and offline, as well as doing more consultancy with schools as well. So we're building out a kind of consultancy database where we'll be able to provide those services to schools to help them improve and develop. And we're also this year going to be doing our first student event, and so that's something we're looking to kind of just dip our toes into.
What's that?
It'll be a student leadership conference focused around AI.
Okay.
So the supposition being that this is an area where actually a lot of kids are taking the lead, right, or have the confidence or maybe just the boldness to just try these things out, and so we want to create a platform for them to learn from each other and then to bring that back to their schools.
I mean, you work regionally. I'm not sure across how many regions, certainly most of Asia Pacific.
ASEAN region, I guess you could
ASEAN.
say, Asia Pacific, and then mainland China. Yeah.
And what's your take on the explosion of the number of international schools across these countries? And it's just, it seems that there's no end to it.
Yeah, I mean, it's I'm not an expert on like kind of the macroeconomic picture of it, but I guess it's a sign of growing economies in the region, growing middle class that can afford to send their kids to a different kind of schooling setting. It's a lot of it's the story of China. A lot of these schools that have been built in Southeast Asia, the market is mainland China families. Yeah. So I think it's just it's a great story for the region, right? In terms of the economy is growing and people looking for different kinds of educational platforms and experiences.
And what does that mean then for, we have a lot of families who expect an international school to be international, and it just isn't anymore.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's definitely changed, right? I mean, when I first was a student at international school in the 90s, right, like international school was a school for expats, right? Whereas now international school broadly means you're doing international curriculum, right? But it doesn't describe the student population. So our terminology there has shifted for sure. So I don't know what you can do about that. I mean, you can't just evenly distribute the foreigners, right? I think it's. But I think that the population of a school obviously has a huge impact on the value proposition of a school. So I totally understand parents' concerns or questions about that.
But are you seeing that in terms of sort of recruitment as well? And teachers, you must know a lot of teachers over the decades who've had a number of different jobs in sort of different schools. And, are they feeling, to generalization though, but again, the de-internationalization of international schools? Because we say, let me come on to the leadership chaos that we're seeing, certainly in Hong Kong. This year, have you seen like how many heads of schools are interim, have left all of a sudden?
I think these things just go in cycles. I don't think there's any kind of like reason for that. I think it's just.
Do you know? I was going to ask you. You don't think there's?
Not really. No, I think it's just because as you said, I mean, all these schools are independent. There's not really any macro external force that's creating that. I think it's just it happens in individual schools. Sometimes 20% of the staff change over, and it's just that year. It's not any particular reason behind it. So I don't know. Yeah, I think it's I forgot what your original question was there.
I was going to ask you if you did have any thoughts on the reason for such chaos this year.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's chaos. I think that the schools have leadership transitions. I think it's that boards make their decisions, and there's each one of these ones has its own particular reason behind it. I don't think there's any, like I said, grand theory behind it.
You don't think it's somewhat linked to the de-internationalization culture changing in these schools?
I don't think so. I think every school would have its own story about that. I mean, I think that there definitely is, particular cases when it comes to schools where, the move towards bilingual, education is definitely, that's an area where there is, transition, right? And there are individual cases of schools where, they're making that transition, and it's a challenging transition. I think when you were asking before about from a teacher perspective, I don't think teachers will teach the kids that they're in their classroom. I don't think that their teachers aren't going to necessarily choose a school because it's less or more international. I don't see that. I haven't seen that conversation out there. They may have views in terms of their own kids, right? And whether their kids will fit in and all that if they have their own children. But in terms of like working in the school, if it's an IB school, it's an IB school. They know the curriculum. I don't know if like the composition of the kids and what countries they come from is necessarily a huge factor for teachers teaching.
Interesting. This is just all about expectations. I mean, I have heard, isolated anecdotes of, when a school goes to London or New York and they say, well, we're an international school in Hong Kong. There's an expectation or there's an idea of what it is. And then they get here and they're like, oh, that's not what I thought it was.
No, I haven't heard those stories. There may be individual cases like that, but yeah.
Okay.
I mean, the shift has happened quite quickly, right?
It
in terms
has.
of schools, because the number of schools has expanded, the population, the composition has changed in Hong Kong in particular. So yeah, I mean, sometimes it takes a while for the the understandings elsewhere to catch up with the reality now, for sure.
But also with your background and your interest in economics and politics, I mean, do you think or do you see any real difference in a school that's for-profit or non-profit?
That's a minefield, that question, I think. I think that, I don't believe, right, and I know that there's a lot of conversations about this, that the tax status of a school, whether it's profit, not-for-profit, I wouldn't say for-profit, but, a not-for-profit, is determinative of the educational quality, right? I think that there's a lot of other factors that come into that, from governance and leadership and all of those kinds of things. So I don't necessarily think that there is a causal relationship there between the quality of the experience that kids are going to be getting in the school.
Yeah, just too many variables. It's just another one.
Yeah, I would definitely say so. Yeah, I mean, I think definitely in the teacher, community, there's a lot of conversations about for-profit, not-for-profit, and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But I think in terms of the actual delivery, I mean, I've done a lot of work with a lot of different schools. There are different kinds of schools, whether they're part of groups or independently owned by a single individual, to a school that is governed by a parent board, that kind of thing. And they each have their own quirks. But in terms of the actual lived experience or the students and the teachers, I don't know if the tax status is there. And the reality is most schools now are for-profit, because any of the new ones opening up are essentially,
Yeah, but there's a technicality there, isn't there, as well, with what they are on paper and what they are actually.
Yeah, I mean, there's all these different structures and so on that schools do. But I mean, the reality is that any school that's opened in the last 10 years is probably most likely a for-profit, because it's hard to open a school, right? I mean, you have to be slightly mad to decide to open a school. So there are some examples of individual schools that have opened up that are doing the kind of independent board, not-for-profit route. But that's that takes a certain kind of passion for somebody, right, to really do that, and that's far less common than the commercial motivation.
Yeah, certainly. Or madness, as you say. I mean, have you ever been asked to open a school?
No.
Have you not?
No.
I have, more than once. It's an idea that percolates, because when you see what you see, like what we see on a day-to-day basis, you must be thinking, I could do so much better, or I know what the problem is here, I know how to fix this.
No, it's like I think we were saying just before we started recording, right? I mean, ideas are easy, it's the execution that's hard. And I know a lot of people that have been part of founding teams of schools, and so I've had the opportunity to have lots of conversations with people, and it's hard actually, because there is this whole thing of you may have this vision for what you want to do in your school that's in your head, and maybe you write it down on paper and you publish it and you send around the PDF to everyone, but the reality is everyone's idea of school is so deeply embedded in their brain, right, and their culture and their instincts. And I think it's very hard to fight against. That's why schools are so hard to change, because we're just wired to think that schools should be a certain way. And I think it's very, very challenging to start new schools and do things in different ways than the kind of patterns that currently exist.
They keep coming to open more schools. I like your focus on, I'm going to use that if you don't mind, you focus on the lived experience of your child. And that's something that I really try to emphasize with the parents that I speak with, because you've got 2 children, I've got 2 children. They had very different experiences, even in the same school. They were in the same school for a brief period. So it's really just important to focus on, your child going to school every day and the teacher that they're going to be interacting with, and then they can go home and do all the tutoring online. Thanks, Justin. It's been interesting. Always great to have a chat with you, and thanks so much.